This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. André Brock, Associate Professor of Media Studies at Georgia Tech. He earned his PhD in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois and an MA in English from Carnegie Mellon. He writes on the Black Digital. His scholarship examines Black digital practices in social media, video games, blogs, and other digital technologies. He has published innovative and groundbreaking research on Black Twitter and on digital research methods. His first book, Distributed Blackness, African American Cybercultures, theorizes Black everyday lives mediated by network technologies and was recently named by The Verge as one of the top tech books of all time. It was also the 2021 winner of the Harry Shaw and Katrina Hazard Donald Award for Outstanding Work in African American Popular Culture by the Popular Culture Association and the 2021 Association of Internet Researchers Nancy Byam Book Award for Best Book in Internet Studies. Hello, how are you doing today, Dr. Brock?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for being here. The end of the semester on a Friday. So let's dive in. How did you get into Black studies as a field? What drew you in and keeps you committed to Black studies?
Whew. Okay, so I have confessions, like Usher. Um, I have only recently realized that I am part of Black Studies as a field, in part because have not had that training. My joke recently is that if you hire me to teach in your Black Studies department, I don't know anything about the Nakusa Saba. And so my orientation towards Blackness has always been I wanted to speak for the everyday Black folk, right? Not the Black exemplars, not Black pathology, but that vast group of Black people in between. And so this started when I wanted to do writing studies for workers in New York City, many of whom were Black but also diasporic. And I wanted to find a way to reach them using the home languages that they use in order to get them to become better writers. And so that was an interesting space because writing studies, despite the fantastic work of Keith Gilliard and Elaine Richardson and Adam Banks and Geneva Smitherman, still is kind of a missionary field where they're trying to coerce people to write in a particular way. And so I started there, but then I quickly made this move to, I wanted to write about technology because I saw that technology was this new frontier where Black people were writing themselves into existence in a space where they weren't expected to be at all. And so that also became my overriding focus. And I give this long-winded beginning to say that during the course of this undergraduate journey to graduate school, I might have taken a couple of courses in Black sociolinguistics, but never a course on Intro to Black Studies or anything like that. In part because I was working full-time and going to school full-time, and those courses weren't really available in the evening. Right, so I didn't actually encounter Black Studies materials until I got to Carnegie Mellon, and then later Illinois. And I got introduced to critical race theory first, and then Black rhetoric second. And so those two things really kind of pushed me to start thinking, what is it about Black language that can manifest the presence of Blackness without a Black body? And from there, that's where my Black Studies journey starts. Right? So as a field, I still feel as if I'm doing the autodidact thing where I'm still picking up text and learning them and reading them. And every once in a while I get blessed and I have a chance to talk to either the people who wrote the book or students who are reading the book or people who have studied it. right? But for the most part, I feel like I've been muddling through on my own. And so as a result, my approach to Black studies has largely been through the works of W.B. Du Bois, um, then the critical race theory of Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, and then the sociology of knowledge from Patricia Hill Collins, which taken, as a whole is a great starter pack,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily reach towards the critical theory stuff, right? Like Barbara Christian, like Hortense Spillers and the stuff. And so that stuff I've been reaching towards lately, right? So I would say I have kind of a mission driven approach to Black studies. I wanted to be able to talk through Black language, Black rhetoric, and technology. And those were the texts that initially drew me in towards talking about Black studies as a field. And then this is long winded. I apologize. So
Fine.
what keeps me what keeps me committed is that I wrote this book that I didn't want to write. Uh, long story, villain origin story, right? And I published it the week before the pandemic hit, right? So I've been giving talks on it. People seem to be interested in it because I've been talking about Black Twitter for almost a decade at that point, and people, of course, were interested in Black Twitter as a space for Black community and collectivity and social justice. But writing the book changed, I think, how people understood the work that I was doing. Before the book, I was a qualitative social scientist doing interpretive work. After the book, all of a sudden, people started seeing me more as someone who theorizes Black life. And that's been an interesting position change to take, right? Since coming out of the pandemic and starting to go to conferences, I'm seeing people who I never had conversations before, like Dr. Ashley Newby. Like, I got your book. I read your book. Like, why is you reading my book? Like, right. I wrote this book in part because I came out of a field that was deeply atheoretical, information science, right? And I wanted to speak to Blackness, but I've never really been in conversation with like Black studies conferences, Black studies journals, and the like. And so the fact that I managed to get it right is constantly amazing to me. Because just because you Black don't mean you know how to write about Black people, if that makes sense,
X.
right? And there's a lot of Black people who write about Black stuff that ain't Black studies. That's the other part.
Yep.
And I was worried that I was in that second category, but I have been reassured, if not outright cursed out, kindly, but not, but like get your mind right. Like, you are Black studies, right? And so I'm taking that on faith, and this is why I asked if I could be invited on this thing, because I wanted to talk to y'all about how to integrate the Black digital into what Black studies is and can be. That makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. You said a couple of things I want to follow up on. One, so the connection to Black rhetoric, that's how I came to Black studies too. So I see you. That is, to me, it's a perfect inroads. Also in thinking about how people teach writing studies, right? Like that, and the pedagogy behind it, and the comparison to like the way that things happen in the classroom, in like a Black studies classroom, and what it means to have like a Black studies rhetoric classroom or a Black rhetorical space. But going from the information sciences to the rhetoric to now being more in embracing your thrust into Black studies. Can you say a little bit more about that transition? Because I think it's really interesting to go from information sciences.
Okay. There's a subfield bridging rhetoric and information science called computer mediated communication.
Okay.
And it draws on a lot of writing studies. The key figure in there is Susan Herring, and she does gender based studies of computer mediated communication. And it was fascinating to me because she was arguing that the technology does something to mediate the culture that people bring to their practice of using the technology. And it was kind of revelatory at the mind because information science was really trying hard to get me to only focus on digital divide stuff, right? Where they were saying Black people operate from a deficit model. We don't have the money, we don't have the computers, we don't have the literacy, we don't have the connectivity. And I have been living in New York at that point for over a decade. And I'm like, bruh, I just went to a Tribe Called Quest concert a few years back, and everybody has sky pagers, right? Like beat me 911, it just kept on the radio. Like we are very much invested in information technologies, right? And so I started thinking that one, blackness is a rupture to how white people understand the ways the internet works. Because to the default for them, the default internet user is white male, middle class, heterosexual, Christian, right? And so when I first started writing about technology, I would get people saying, "Well, how do you know these people are really black?" I'm like, I used to tell the terrible Chris Rock joke where he would say, there's a one-legged busboy in this restaurant. He wouldn't trade places with me for all the money in the world because he's white. You don't want to be a rich black man. And I was like, that's very much the way being black online don't get you no brownie points. But it's crucial to us for us to articulate how the way we see the world shapes our experience on these platforms, right? And I will say, from an information science perspective, I am on the margins of information science. Uh, in part because I study social media, in part because I'm qualitative, and in part because I care about culture. Right? Information science has very much been picked up by data science and computer science and HCI. So they're not as interested in the cultural aspects that I am, but that's not how I was trained. I was fortunate to be trained to think about how computers and institutions come together to produce certain outcomes. And I just said, well, instead of an institution like work, which we could talk about, right? What if the institution is community? Right? Because community in a certain way is an institution, right? And so then how do Black people understand their technology use as part of a community? How do they bring themselves to that technology use? And what it turns out is that we look for Black information sources that will fit our uses and needs, just like white people do. It's much harder for us to find. And that's always been.
Thank you. That I did not know about that intermediary field there.
Mm,
And that is really interesting. And I think that the focus on culture is what I was curious about when you
mm.
said when you have a degree in information science, because it isn't as
They've they've
common.
been fighting. They've been fighting me on this. My dissertation was one of the first dissertations on blogs, and I looked at people blogging after Hurricane Katrina's aftermath because I thought it was fascinating that the media was portraying us as looters or finders or refugees versus evacuees. And here you have an information space where Black people can come online and say, "That's not me. I got family down here, right? I was born down, my family's been down here for generations." Or, we weren't looting. We were getting stuff so that we could provide for our families, right? And so doing that online was something that wasn't necessarily possible with Ebony and Jet, with Essence and Black
Mhm.
Enterprise, or even with the newspapers of the day, because the Black media outlets barely covered Katrina. If you go back and look, it was Tom Joyner and Black America Web, and that's about it, right? Because we simply weren't prepared to be online in that way. And so to then have this technology called weblogs, where people took their time and energy to write out their feelings about being American, their feelings about being Southern, their feelings about being Black at a time of crisis, that was fascinating to me. And I was like, this is a new way to understand how culture and the internet can mesh together. It's not just internet culture. It's not a bunch of fuzzies or a bunch of hackers, right? It's Black people who are using the internet to speak themselves into existence. And I thought that was super significant.
Definitely. I think that that noticing the ways in which Black people are speaking themselves into existence in spaces that were not necessarily created for them or even expected that they would show up in is such an important point, which is, of course, talked about in your book, um, which we're going to get to in just a second. But building on your background and your journey to Black studies, how do you situate yourself in relationship to these multiple fields and disciplines that are coming together to produce the kind of research and your interests that
Mhm.
you work on today?
So I feel like we're overdue for a field called Black Information Studies or Black Digital Studies, right? And the reason why I say that is two of the scholars that I was influenced most by. One is a literacy scholar. Actually, both of them are literacy scholars. One is Elfrida Chapman, who was at Florida State, and she wrote a book about called "The Information Life of Outsiders." Right. The other one was Shirley Bryce Heath, and Shirley Bryce Heath work is really fascinating because she wrote on how Black women and rural communities in North Carolina work together to help their people in their neighborhood learn how to fill out the forms necessary to get Medicaid and Medicare. Right. So Black people have always had an orientation towards information. Even if our information is for us by us, it's still at moments where it has to translate to an outside community and we have to not necessarily code switch, but reconfigure ourselves. We're mediated by the institution or by the thing. And so that part has been super important to me. And again, it's the idea that it's quotidian, it's everyday Black folk, right? Because I think Black elites have had the luxury, the capacity to translate themselves in ways that the Black everyday does not, right? We can go back to Brown v. Board to talk through that, right? But in many ways, the Black everyday has really been deprecated. In many ways, we have long been considered uh, uncultured, low cultured, right? Unserious, right? And my thing is just because you don't think that we have the same political goals or economic goals that the Black elites have in order to quote unquote advance us, that doesn't mean the culture that we're building, the culture that we share is not as important, if not more so, because y'all come from our neighborhoods. It's not, so it's just as important as anything the elites do or the poorest of the poor do. We need to have spaces to talk about that. And the internet has really been fabulous in providing us insights into how everyday Black folk think, for good and for ill. Like we can talk about hot ghetto mess, right?
I forgot about that.
Right? Or the black male podcast in this relationship podcast industry. Like we got lots of bad examples, but there's a lot of good stuff out there too. And I want us to be able to capture. I think that Black information studies and Black studies overall should take on this mission of documenting and analyzing this archive that we have been handed that is not ours, but
Mhm.
is filled with our life while we have it. Because how long are we gonna have it? Who knows? And so that's really part of where I'm at right
So I have a question that is not one of the
now.
questions I
Yes,
sent you, but I am curious, right? Because you
yes, or
did uh, research on and writing on thinking about like Black Twitter and what that was. I don't know if
mhm.
it's still a thing as much anymore. Um, but I am interested in what you think about the spaces that people have migrated to in leaving Twitter as a platform because of who owns it and the toxicity level that has happened over there.
So you will understand this definition. Many cities in Michigan have been afflicted by Republican governors with managers, right? Flint had one, Detroit had one, Benton Harbor had one. And many of those managers were inimical to the people, the Black communities that lived in those cities. They treated them like trash. They thought they mismanaged whatever resources they had. They did not respect their governance. Did people leave?
No.
No, because that was where they had built their lives, their spaces, their churches, their restaurants, and everything else, right? And so some people did leave, right? Because some people have the capacity or just can't take it anymore to where they're going to look for a better life elsewhere. But I find that even if your landlord is the most racist landlord ever, but you have a community of people who you love and support, you'll stay in that neighborhood much longer than you probably should
Mhm.
because that neighborhood brings you life. And I see Twitter in that same way. Right. And I feel vindicated every time something big happens that is of import to the Black community, because guess what? They come running right back to Twitter. Right. Right. So Sinners has been a really good example. Right. There's been so much Sinners discourse and this, I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but the Ryan Coogler movie. Right. And there's been so much discourse about the Black South and the Black Gothic and hoodoo and passing and dark skinned women. And Michael B. Jordan actually is an actor, which I was unaware of. And so, right. And this is where we come back to every time. It's like when Black elites or people who have just, made a little change, they move out of the neighborhood because they want to put their kids in quote unquote safer spaces with better schools, not knowing the white teachers not going to love their kids, but they still come back to the neighborhood to go to church.
Mhm.
They come back to the neighborhood to get their kids' haircut or hair done because that's the space that gives us life, right? And one of the things I've been talking about in the new book is this concept. I think it's Derrida. He calls it a pharmacon, right? And a pharmacon is both poison and cured, right? And it's very clear under apartheid Clyde that Twitter has become poisonous in many ways,
Mhm.
right? But it's also very clear that despite the poisonous effects of it, I wrote this like 15 years ago now, and I stick by it. When the white people don't pay us no attention, we still gonna be doing what we do on this site because this is a space where we come together to build life. The thing about the diaspora, and I have a couple of really smart junior colleagues who are writing about these diasporas, is that they also take time. So Twitter didn't pop when it started, right? It took, I would argue, 5 years before people really started paying attention to what Twitter was and did,
Mhm.
right? The People's History of Black Twitter on Hulu does a really good job explaining this in the first episode, right? And so even though people have been creating Twitter alternatives, they're not Twitter. Right. And I call this the Black soul food restaurant paradox, right? If there are 4 Black soul food restaurants in your immediate vicinity, which is your favorite? You're not going to go to the other ones. I don't care if that one has good greens and this other one has good mac and cheese. There's one that has everything you like or most things. You're going to keep going to that one because you can get what you need right there. And so until those other spaces establish things that are life giving, that are of interest, and I'm very much aware that Threads has 300 million people. It's dry though. It's so dry. Blue Sky is liberal and dry, right? Mastodon, ain't nobody on Mastodon, right? Spill is interesting, in part because I don't know if you know this, Spill has a place in the nav bar on the bottom of your phone where you can enter and play spades against other people. I'm like, that's actually kind of
I
genius.
did not know that.
Right. You can play against bots and you can play. I'm like, okay, that was a good move. Right. But nobody uses it. Right. And
Yeah.
so these things take time. Diasporas don't happen overnight. Diasporas take years. Right. And so eventually, perhaps people will continue to migrate to these spaces and they will come alive in the ways that Black Twitter has been for over a decade. But at this moment, it's not that. And what I've seen more than the diaspora, people just checking out of social media altogether. Because to be fair, as terrible as Twitter is, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, uh, and a couple of other places are just as toxic
Yeah.
in different ways, but the toxicity is still there. And so people are like, you know what, dead this social media. I'm going back to the group chat. Right. Right. And so it's an interesting time to study this stuff because it's really in flux. And we haven't talked about TikTok at all. I'm not sure how to exactly to explain TikTok, but I don't necessarily see it as a social network. And that's something of interest. We also haven't really talked about Black Sky, but it will take time for people to find those spaces and then live in those spaces. But in the meantime, people will keep coming back to Twitter because it was a place where they had joy and will experience joy because that's where we all at.
That's fair. That's fair. I think the point about people leaving social media overall is really important. I think and I don't know if it is. I mean, it's gotta be a combination of both, like, everything that's happening and it just being like, this is too much information overload 24/7,
Mhm.
and the stages that people are going through in their lives. Like, I was an undergrad when Twitter started. So, like, I grew up on Twitter in a way
Correct.
that, like, I'm not in the same space that I was when I was 19 years old, right? And my engagement in my, um time even to, like, be in these spaces is not what it used to be. Um, and then thinking about, like, then I think about my daughter who is 12 and, like, nah, she will not be on Twitter. But like her, her, like she wanted TikTok, so I'm like, now I gotta get a TikTok account because I gotta monitor. Or like Instagram, so now we got a linked Instagram account so I can monitor. But like you said, I think that the joy that you found in those spaces that'll bring you back to them, even though the toxic level or the stage that you're in your life is different than the type of engagement that was possible before,
Mhm.
is really interesting to think about, especially right now, because there is so much going on. Um, and yet, in the midst, you still have those sinners moments. You still have, let's
Mhm.
all come together and talk about this thing, which
Mhm.
really was and is like so
It's
fascinating
it's
and fun.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
fun. Right. It's life giving, right? Which is
Yeah.
where I've been for the last few years. Right. And that part is really important to me. There are times when I'm really frustrated with Twitter. Watching the male relationship podcast lose their mind over Tracy Ellis Ross saying she gonna date younger people, talking about she's a groomer. She's 50. She ain't dating 19-year-olds. And then here comes
Uh,
Shannon Sharp.
mm,
And then here comes Shannon Sharp. And they ain't got nothing to say about Shannon, right? They had all the smoke for Tracy, right? I'm just like, so, like I said, poison and cure. But even then, and this is something that's kind of out of my wheelhouse, but I bring it up every once in a while. We talk about abolition and decolonialization, right? Say we get rid of racism. What do you do with the pedophiles? What do you do with the misogynists? What do you do with the people who are just straight up criminals? There's always going to be a bad boy in this mix. You're still going to have to figure out ways to deal with them. And so there will never be a black utopia in that sense because there will be people who are not part of the norm. They don't want to be part
mm.
of the sociality and we'll always have to deal with them. And saying that the presence of those people ruins a space does disservice to the heterogeneity of blackness. Right. And here I'm pulling a lot from Ron Judy's article, which I love to say the title on inward authenticity. I won't do y'all like that today. Right. But, he has this phrase in there, which I love. He says, the black community becomes the police so that the police don't have to come in the community.
Mm.
Well, right. And that describes a lot of what we do in these social media spaces, absent true governance from the platform and absent legal um, uh, guardrails from the police or whatever. We police our own. One of my favorite phrases is "this you," right? That's governance, right? We see what you've been doing. Don't try to act like you ain't been doing this stuff all along, right? And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize.
No, I think all of this is really interesting and important, especially right now. And it's the things that I think about a lot. Like what spaces do I want to be in versus need to be in? And what spaces am I going to allow my child to engage in for the limited amount of time that I have control or oversight over those things? 'Cause
Because you got a young lady in the house. What if you had young boys?
yeah.
Right. Their path to radicalization is happening not even on the socials. It's in Roblox. It's in Fortnite. It's in Apex Legends. Right. And the podcast. Like they're listening to these guys just spew this poison. And we don't really have any controls or guardrails set up to be able to alleviate some of that poison being poured into their ears. So, I'm seeing videos of middle schoolers talking about, I need a woman who's going to cook and clean for me. Boy, you don't even use deodorant. What you talking about? Like, and so
Yeah,
can we blame that on social media or yes, in part, right? But are there other resources on social media that we could redirect them to that perhaps would alter or at least get them to see something slightly different? Also, yes. Let's just try to figure out how to get them to those kids.
yeah. I think that is one of the things that's interesting about, I guess, TikTok more so because, like, that For You page and, like, what the algorithm decides or calculates that you are interested in seeing and how that creates the cycle of things. Like, we've had that conversation. Me and my daughter have had that conversation where it's like, I gotta reset my For You page. Like my algorithm needs a reset. I'm tired of seeing this. Let me go watch these real quick so that my feed is back to what I want to see. Um, but I think that is also, when we think about kids and what they're consuming, it keeps feeding them certain
Right.
things. And trying to mitigate that is very interesting in this moment.
Mhm. Not just the kids, our parents. They
Yeah, yeah, that
because
too.
they don't even have the filters that we've taught our kids to try to have. They just be taking stuff as gospel, and I'm like, "Oh, we can't do that."
Yeah, I am. My grandfather is on Facebook, and that is the only social media he has, and I am thankful for that because I think that Facebook with his 100 friends is a
Mm.
lot safer, even though increasingly less so now that Facebook then put fake profiles on your homepage. But that is better than like a Twitter or an Instagram or a TikTok
Yeah.
to just be scrolling through. Yeah.
Oh, while we're here, I should say that I don't have a Twitter. I don't need to hear nobody talk about what my Twitter feed looks like. So I do not have a Twitter.
Okay. Interesting. So, how you said we're not gonna leave Twitter, but you're not included in the we.
I'm not included in the week because
Okay.
so this is something that I think is interesting to talk about in the context of Black studies, right? If Black studies is a mode of professionalization and intellectual uplift, right? Then what does it mean when somebody who is a Black studies professor goes on Twitter and does not act appropriately? And I write about this in the book, right? There's a technical appropriateness of how you're supposed to use the app, but there's also this respectability politics appropriateness of how you're supposed to act them, right? And if nothing else, my Twitter account has been called out because they're like, well, you be posting them things. I'm like, I also say smart stuff. They're like, but you be posting them things, right? And I'm like, because I took advantage of the fact that this is my data set. And if we're going to call it ethnography, I'm going to be an ethnographer and I'm going to participate, right? But I talked to many young women like yourself, many young male academics like, I can't do that. I can't do what you do because I know my dean is watching, my chair is watching, my colleagues. I have white colleagues come up to me and be like, I really like that stuff you posting. Get off my page, right? Because you ain't talking about content moderation right now. That's not what you're talking about, right? But at the same time, it's a mode of self-expression for me that I'm really loath to give up because I think it reflects the entirety of me, not just the part of me that should be deemed suitable for consumption or presentation simply because I'm a smart Black man, right? And that's absolutely male privilege, right? And I will absolutely own that. But also, I want it to be a model for other people to see themselves as having a little bit more freedom in a space that is technically your personal space, regardless of how it's surveilled. It's technically your personal space, and you should not have to lock down your personal to so much so that it's unrecognizable as a space where you can get life. Right. And so
That is very real because I know. I mean, it's what I didn't do. The Instagram was a little bit. I never got into Instagram in the same way that I was on Twitter, but like when people had the Finstas, right? Like, no, you either have your open Twitter feed and then your
you got the
lockdown
burner.
personal,
Right.
or you very carefully curate that personal one. The one that's open.
Right.
Um, yeah.
And you know what would happen? Y'all would very carefully curate it and nobody would read it.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to hear about your random update about you got a paper published or because there's nothing about you in there. That's about your job, right? And so yeah, it's a tough one. It really is tough. And so I understand why a lot of academics fled back to Instagram because Instagram you can just post photos of you having a good time and you celebrating yourself and the fabulous meals that you have. So you can celebrate this carnal, libidinal side of yourself, this aesthetic side of yourself that doesn't have to be concerned with your academic stuff. And I can see where people find that really appealing. Um, that's just never appealed to me. And because I'm a reader, I always say Twitter's for people who read, Instagram's people who like pictures in their books. And so this is gonna be a terrible podcast, Ashley.
No,
You're
this
gonna
is
get
gonna be amazing. It's probably gonna do numbers. So.
Twitter's for the yappers, right? And so we should come back to TikTok though, because there's something interesting about TikTok. Um, I am unsure as to whether TikTok is a Black collective or a Black community.
Okay.
Right? If I ask my students, most of them are consumers.
Mm-hmm.
A few of them will post their videos and share them with their friends, but they don't expect them to go viral, and many of them never do. Right? And of those few that do consume and post, they only occasionally pay attention to the comments. Right? So TikTok is largely understood as a video platform. People pay attention to the stitches and the duets and the recitations and everything else. But for every TikTok that goes viral, some of those viral videos have 100,000 comments. Right. And to me, that's fascinating. Like, it's 100,000 Black people in here talking about how wild this particular thing, or you went crazy. And look at these YNs acting out, right? And nobody talks about that, right? So to me, is TikTok the comments where the Black people live, or TikTok the videos where the Black people live, right? And the template for this is YouTube, and I came up to YouTube when I cut my locks off, and I was following people like Afrobella and Black Girl with Long Hair and all these hair influencers who started going to YouTube to post videos about doing hair. And what was fascinating is that in addition to those videos, there were these really robust commenting audiences of Black women largely, like, I tried that product and it didn't really work for me. Or, have you tried this particular combination? Or, I don't have that type of hair. What would you recommend? And it was a community in the comments, right? And you couldn't separate the community from the videos. I don't see people talking about TikTok in that way yet. And just from the research, because I've been teaching about TikTok in my social media class, TikTok was designed as a data extraction platform, not as a social network.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I start saying that, people are like, no, my For You page brings me all the Black creators. I'm like, you trained it to.
Yeah.
But do you follow those people? No. TikTok will bring it to you, but you don't necessarily follow all of these people, because, like we did on Twitter, right? Because that's not the whole purpose of the platform. The purpose of the platform is just continually bring you the information. Is that a community? I'm not sure. But these are questions I think Black Studies needs to take up, right? If we're going to talk about Black geographies, because I'm knee deep in Clive Woods right now, right? If we're going to talk about Black geographies, we should be talking about Black virtual geographies. And Catherine Nightingale has an article where she talks about TikTok is the corner and Twitter is the hood or something. I'm getting it wrong, right? And she's making this connection between Black enclaves like the beauty shop, the barbershop, the stoop, right? And the types of spaces that Black people have established online. And I think that's an excellent start. But I think more Black studies stuff needs to interrogate what it means for us to collect and discuss and talk to and about each other in particular virtual spaces. Right. And so this is part of this. I guess this is you're situating myself in relation to disciplines, right? I want to hear more about Black LinkedIn, because there is a Black LinkedIn, right? And it should be very much about how you can network with other people to get jobs. But what Black folk did during the pandemic was like, let's talk about racism in the workplace. And LinkedIn people hated it. They're like, that's not what we're here to talk about. That's not important to getting a job. Black people are like, shit, it's important to me.
Yes.
Karen, right? Right. And so we bring ourselves to every space and we transform these spaces in ways, even if we don't own them. I think that should be a crucial aspect of the capacity of the internet, one, but for Black studies to understand human geography, digital geographies in ways that I think are really interesting.
That is interesting. And I I'm going to follow up on that in a second because I want to go back for just a moment. You mentioned like in your social media class, right? So I
Hmm.
want to know what all of this, right? Your research interests, your um the work that you do, the training that you've had, the life that you've lived, like how does that manifest itself in your classrooms, right? Like what does it look like to approach social media studies or digital studies from at least a Black studies influenced perspective?
You ain't got that much time. I mean, okay. Okay, so the easiest way to start talking about it is I came up with this method around 2000, right after the dissertation. And as a terrible acronym, CTDA, Critical Technocultural Discourse Analysis. And my argument was that we cannot understand how Black folk use the internet if we study them based on the metrics that white people say we um, should be measured by, right? Du Bois's lions don't have historians,
Mhm.
right? And so the one of the centerpieces of this particular method, which is basically just critical discourse analysis, is that you must evaluate what people are doing online and the space that they're doing it in from the perspective of the understudy. If you're looking at Black people, you need to use Black philosophy, Black cultural studies. If you're looking at queer people, you can use queer theory, performance studies. You must start from that perspective in order to put them at the forefront of how they use it, because that's much more important than saying, oh, they're somehow at a deficit because they're not
Mhm.
using it like white people would. Right? And that informs the way I teach this class. In part, when I was at Michigan, I used to get these complaints: the class is too Black. Here at Georgia Tech, I don't get that as much, right? Because I'm never going to have a Black week.
Mhm.
I will have Black and Brown and Asian people throughout the syllabus, because I think it's important to notice that every cultural group brings something different to the way they use the internet. And included in that, I talk about whiteness. I'm very much using critical whiteness as a lens to talk about Charlie D'Amelio, right? Or Addison Rae or Elon Musk, or we could go back further, right? To talk about how their visions of how the internet should be shape the type of spaces that they control or work in. And so I have, because of the ways that I study the internet, and because I don't want to focus on deficit models or political models or economic models, I guess I should unpack that for a minute, right? Um, I don't think that the ultimate goal of Black people in life is to get the franchise. I think that we live, and getting the franchise is important to help us get better lives, but we still gonna be living. I
Mhm.
don't think that the ultimate goal of Black people is to get economic empowerment, although I'm very much aware that you need money to eat, right? And I also don't think that racism is the one thing that determines how I'm going to move through the world. It's one of the things. It's an important thing, right? But uh, it's not the only thing. And all these come together to where I'm writing about now to talk about a mode of Black life, right? That is invested in building resources to get you to thrive for the next day. And totally stealing this from Moten, who talks about Black life as being funereal, right? And this line that he talks about, what is a second line? What is a repass? People die. It happens every day, right? But what happens after they die, where we take time to remember them and celebrate them? That's as important as the passing of that person, right? And so I want to focus on those life-giving moments that remind us that even though we have been sad, we have been traumatized, that we can still come together as a collective, as a community, to build things for the next day. Right? And so most of my classes, we don't talk about influencers. It pisses my students off. Uh, I don't talk really about how platforms and algorithms are oppressive. Shout out to Sophia. I don't talk about how I just don't focus on creator economies or that stuff, because for me, there's no such thing as a creator who wasn't at first passionate about the thing that they wanted to talk about online. And if you don't talk about their passion, you'll never really get to understand how they became a multimillionaire.
Mhm.
And that's for Marcus K. Brownlee, HD. That's for the Paul brothers. That's all of them. They were doing something fun that they figured out how to monetize, right? And so I want to talk about what was your passion that brought you online. And doing that gives the students a very different perspective on what it means to go online to be yourself, to talk about your life, your interests, your things, right? And it's a way to get them to understand that there are ways to build community that don't revolve around getting a million followers, right? And so my class is a little off the beaten track, but I find that my students come out of there thinking they don't think as negatively about the internet when they leave as they did when they come in. Right. Recently, Pew Internet released a study saying a lot of Gen Z kids think they're just going to be influencers. Right. I mean, really, what choice do they have? What jobs they got? Right.
Yeah.
And I tell them, if you can't get excited about writing a research paper, you're not going to be excited about being an influencer because it's a lot of work. It's
Yeah.
so much work. You have no idea how much work it is to do the video, edit the video, post the video, support the video, make more videos on time, on schedule, so that people have this constant drip feed of content, which I hate. Right. And so I try to find things which talk about some stuff that's problematic, in particular, how it's still deeply problematic for women to be online. But I make sure to make it clear that online wasn't the reason why women get harassed and sexualized and objectified. That men have been doing that forever.
Hmm.
Uh, and so and I keep centering this and this idea of Black optimism, totally again stealing from Moga and Kevin Quashie and a couple of other people, right? That Black life pre-exists the political, pre-exists the economic, because Black life is built on a series of relations that help us work together to make it to the next day. And I think it works for me. Uh, I'm a terrible teacher, so my evaluations are kind of mediocre. My evaluations are a little mid. My ADHD be killing me. But I get those, those one or two students that come up to you afterwards, like, what you said really changed the way that I saw the internet, and I really appreciate it. That's really all I ask for,
Hmm.
right? Some of them never buy into it, particularly the business and marketing students who are being trained to do dark patterns to extort people. They don't want to hear this stuff, right? They want to hear more about how to optimize the pattern so that you can hook grandma into buying more vitamins than she needs. We're not doing that, right? And talking about social media helps, right? Um, I have avoided talking about AI for the most part because it's not really interesting. It's very much distractive. And so talking about social media also helps me keep the focus on life, human life in general, but Black life in particular across the various platforms that these students use.
Thank you. That is interesting, and I would like to take that class. Like, I mean, I guess
Don't
different
gas me up,
generations,
newbie.
like,
Don't
but,
gas
like,
me up, newbie. Come on
no,
now.
to think about it from that perspective, I think that it would be that would be refreshing because that isn't how it's usually studied or taught, in most just standard classes. But I also think it's so important to have that starting point for like what Black life is. Like, it's not about these other things. It is about the relationships and how we make it to tomorrow, or
Mhm,
how we celebrate those who didn't make it to tomorrow with us. Um and I think that that's such an important centering and foundation to have in thinking about like how we going to continue to make it to tomorrow.
mhm,
And the ways in which these spaces might allow us to do that, even if the space itself was not designed for it or does not promote that use of it.
So I'm watching Sinners, and the twins buy what they thought was a sawmill. Turns out it was a killing floor, but they made it into a juke joint where these people had the best night of their life before things went bad, right? And I'm like, that's such a great metaphor. How we'll take a space that's not meant for us, that was
Mhm.
meant to oppress us, and turn it into something where we can say, even if it's for a minute, right? It's still that minute, and then at the end of the movie, the guy
Wait,
says,
wait,
"That
wait,
was
wait. Don't. Don't. Is it a spoiler? Because I ain't.
No, it's not a
I'm
spoiler.
going to see it this weekend. Okay. Okay.
At the end of the movie, it says that was the best night of my life. Right. And so, yeah, there's something there, right? I've run into a lot of people who are like, well, we need to own our spaces, and those will make the best spaces. And I'm like, there are a lot of people who have created Black-owned spaces that Black people will not support because they just don't see enough of what they want in those spaces. One of the first articles I wrote was about a browser called Blackbird, and it's in the book. And it was designed by three Black guys, and they put in stuff that they thought would be interesting to Black people, like a Google search that returned terms for Black people that were not Black born, right? And some other really interesting things. And one of the things Black people said was, "Who is these news? I don't know them. How do they know what type of Black person I am?" Right? Because we are very clear that we are heterogeneous. Like
Mm-hmm.
we are not to be lumped in all together as one type. And so, every Black space is not going to be for everybody. And the internet does something to where it makes you think that that's going to be the one space where everybody goes, and it's just not like that. So sorry about the spoiler. It's not a spoiler. Spoiler.
No,
You,
that
you
I
know
think I'll
you
be
know
looking
somebody
for that one.
somebody lives. I'll say that.
Okay.
There
Okay.
you go.
Okay. That is. Listen, I have been fighting for
You've
my
been duck,
life this week,
you've been
dodging
ducking those
spoilers.
spoilers.
No, I don't have time to go see it until this weekend. So I
And
have
folk are
been
getting
like
egregious with it too. Like, I'm
very
like, did
much
you
like
really?
scrolling, muting, like putting the phone down. Like, no, don't spoil it, y'all.
Okay.
And I'm so much looking forward to it. One, because everybody says how fabulous it is. Then I got my students like, have you seen it yet? Because we need to talk about it. I need you to go see it so we can talk about it in class. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, y'all. Your professor has a life. And I couldn't spend my Friday night watching it because I had to grade your papers. So
There it is. I think you'll enjoy it.
yeah, I think I will too. I think I will too.
I have run into some sinners haters, which I wasn't expecting, but for the most part, everybody seems to like it.
The people in my life that have seen it liked it. And so I trust their perspective even more so than like a Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, sure, 100%. That's great. I don't really care what Rotten Tomatoes says, but
Right. That's not even
when
us. Right.
when my homegirl tells me that she gonna go see it with me again this weekend just because she has to see it twice,
Mm-hmm.
immediately I'm like, okay, then let's do that.
I will say, if you can, spend the change to see it in IMAX.
Okay.
But book the ticket today, Ashley, because you'll be in the corner in the IMAX, like, oh my god, this thing is so big.
Yeah, that is a good point. And actually, I will do. I'll do that and all of that. Sorry about the tangent on sinners. So there was that, the pedagogy piece, and then I wanted to come back to so you talked about the questions moving forward. So where you think, Black studies should be thinking about in like digital geographies or Black digital geographies, or what Black spaces look like across different planes. So before I ask you more about that, as somebody who didn't necessarily consider themselves to be Black studies until fairly recently, and who is now diving in and really immersing themselves in some of that past and background and history, what interests you most about what has happened in the field up to this point?
That's a good question. So I'm basic. I've been writing for years on Du Bois, right? And then, as I mentioned earlier, the critical race scholars. Then I ran headfirst into Wilderson's Red, White, and Black when I started writing the book. It was recommended to me by a graduate student. And so Afro-pessimism has been an interesting interlocutor from a distance because I don't buy into it. I don't really care for it. And so even before I started digging into most versions of Black optimism, I was like, this ain't gonna work for me, right?
Mhm.
But what did work was libidinal economy, right? And what I found is that by writing about libidinal economy, I started writing about Black joy. And that's one of the things that I wasn't aware that I was writing about per se. But I would say 6 times out of 10, when somebody approaches me about the book to tell me how much they like it, they say, I like that you focused on Black joy. And I was like, I did. I don't remember that, but okay. Right. And so as a result, I've been really going through moments of Afrofuturism, Afro-Surrealism, speculative blackness, but also black interiority. So Elizabeth Alexander, Catherine McKittrick, Sylvia Winter, Kevin Quashie, Kevin Young's The Gray Album, which is a fantastic book, which I think more people need to read. Elizabeth Alexander, Alex Wahelier. So a lot of the people who've been writing over the last decade, working to expand Black studies, in part to encompass technology, but in part to talk through uh, a, what I would argue is a different way to understand a Black modernity, right? That is not postmodern, right? Because I don't think we will ever get there. It doesn't really make sense for Blackness, right? But uh, in ways that I find really interesting because I want to tie the digital to a Black modernity in ways that make sense for us. There's a really fascinating book that I'm struggling with because I'm not that bright. This cat named Ramon Amaro, he wrote a book called Black Technical Object, and he's using Denise de Ferreira de Silva and some other really smart people to talk about how machine language has always already constructed the Black as a technical object, right? As something, an object among objects to be extracted from. I'm like, that is absolutely correct. What can I do to not refute that, but push back against that?
Mhm.
Right. And so these are the people who I've been in conversation with since while I was writing the book and since I've been writing the book. Because I want to, again, talk about Black life. I mentioned Clive Wood. So a lot of stuff on blues. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas and the Dark Fantastic, Richard Aiton. Like it's kind of all over the place, but this focus is really wanting to talk about not necessarily the surreal, but the otherwise, right? I am an Afrofuturism hater. Uh, and so,
Why?
remember I told you I love the quotidian, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like way too much Afrofuturist scholarship focuses on the literary, the arts, the letters, the music, and everything else. I'm like, while artists are people who do fantastic things, we're the everyday, right?
Okay.
So I wanted to talk about you've been on Twitter long enough, Kashawn Thompson's Black Girls Are Magic,
Mhm.
right? To me, that's Afro-Surrealism, right? The idea that you can make beauty out of little or next to nothing. You can adorn yourself. You have this command of Black aesthetics and style to take the least to make it look like the most, right? That's not an Afro-future. That's an Afro-present, right? And
Mhm.
I want to write about the Afro-present. So I talk shit about, not talk shit so much about saying, I think that the way I talk about Black technoculture, the way we use technologies to express ourselves, should be complementary to Afrofuturism. But it's the technoculture is where we are now,
Mhm.
right? Not some unknowable moment. Although Octavia predicted this year real well,
Real
right?
well.
Real well. Not some unknowable future, but a moment that we can actually put into practice. There is a practice of joy, and Mbembe calls it an ethos of care and self repair, which I love, right? That we can enact at this moment because it's what we need right now to get through whatever's going on in the next. So, like, if people lose their job, you say, hey, you can stay with me for a while till you get on your feet, right? That's care and self repair. That's, you can't stay with me forever. This ain't no future. But for the present, you know what I'm saying? And for the next few minutes, days, months, we will build together so that you can do what you need to do to get on your feet. And I'm trying to write through and about that using social media as the data to talk about that. right? And I find social media is really helpful, again, because it's an archive of everyday Blackness that has not been seen and will never be seen again. Uh, I love going through Google Books purchased Ebony Jet back in 2009. So you can see all the magazines all the way back to Negro Digest. And you can read, all the stuff that people were concerned with back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? But it wasn't everyday Black life, right? Maybe the closest I could get to everyday Black life is looking at hype hair, right? Or or King, right? But even then, that's not the type of everyday Black life I want to. I want to see conversation where people argue whether or not you're supposed to eat the bread that they put down on the table before the meal, right? And if that makes you low class, I want to read about blavity Black Twitter and trap brunches, right? Because to me, these contestations of Blackness are super important. And they're the
Mhm.
things that kind of get overlooked because they're so everyday, right? Because they're so banal. But we now have them archived and recorded, and I think they deserve as much inquiry as anything else. So I think I kind of answered your question. Kind
No,
of.
you did. You definitely did. And I think that, yeah, it's those everyday things that just reaffirm, like, the love for being Black,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yep. And so you have Blair Kelly on, right? And Black folks has been immensely inspirational since it came out because she's writing about everyday Black folk, right?
Mhm.
Not just the soldiers who are marching, but the people who made sure they had something to eat
Mhm.
and the people who darned their socks. Those are the important people too, right? And so I want to do the same thing for writing about, uh, Mimi and Temecula or right? Or the Black Solstice. So the book is going to cover from 2019 through 2024. So I get to talk about Versus. I get to talk about the Black Solstice when we were all supposed to get our superpowers. I
Mhm.
get to talk about the way we talked about the pandemic and D-Nice and all these things that because we lost the external institutions that we used for sociality, we turned to the internet and built something slightly different, right? And I think that's really important to capture. It's not really historical. It ain't old enough, right? It's not even really archival because I don't have a ton of data. But I think it's interesting. It's enough examples to talk about a mode of Black life that happened without necessarily Black people being in the same physical space.
Mhm. Well, that sounds very interesting. When is that coming?
I know you didn't just ask me that question. It will be when it is.
Okay. I mean, that is a perfectly acceptable answer. It will manifest when it is
it,
supposed to.
it's in process. I'm trying to have it done by the end of the year.
Okay. I think that that'll be regardless. I've one of the things that has been so fascinating, and maybe it's just a matter of just, Marcus Hunter has this, he talks about Black Logic, Black Method, and, like, Black Time. Like,
Yeah.
so many of the books that have come out recently have just been, like, the perfect time. Like, this is,
Mhm.
like, the perfect Black time for things to
Yeah.
drop, like, with, Blair Kelly's book and, um, Alexis Pauline Gumbs' new book, and, like, it's just been this is the perfect time. So, it'll be here on CP time when it's supposed to be.
No, it's not on CP time. It's
That's
on.
what he
I'm trying to
calls
get
it.
promoted time.
That's what I'm oh, okay, well.
That's gonna be on time. Uh, but no, I get what he's saying. Like, I think there has been a flourishing of Black studies, in part because of the George Floyd moment, right? When we were able to get book contracts easily and happily, right? But also because there's been a flowering of academics who have felt the freedom to be more expansive in the types of
Mhm,
ways than the ways that they talk about Black. Right, we're no longer as much in a recovery mode as we are in a speculation mode, or uh, um, even not just speculation, but theoretical
mhm,
thinking. Right, I'm thinking Imani Perry's new book, The Color of Blue. Right,
mhm.
that type of stuff I think is really important. So
I agree, and that is one of the things that has been so phenomenally amazing, and unanticipated for some reason, about being able to have these conversations is hearing about, like, all of these new books and reading books and being able to engage, about them, and that I've loved, loved, loved that part of having these conversations.
It's literally too many books.
It is, and I love them, but, if you're an academic, I feel like you have to love books, and, like, I love books,
I do
and I'm
too.
out of space, and I love it, and, like, I have
Thank,
to go buy more, we have to buy more bookshelves because like,
thank
all the
God,
books.
thank God for PDFs. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, PDFs are great, and I have a lot of books on PDF, but I like the physicality of books. Like, I like being
Mhm.
able to, like, highlight and write and put the tabs in. And my sister who is in she's getting her PhD right now. So, like, we just have tons and tons and tons of books. And every week it's like, well, I gotta buy that book because
Because, right.
yeah.
I mean, there is something really kind of like fantastic when somebody walks up to you with your book and there are flags on almost every page of things they want to talk to you about. I'm like, oh my God. I'm not ready for this. I'm so not ready.
Yeah, being able to do that is also really cool. Like, to be like, "No, I didn't just buy this so that I look like you can sign it for me." But, like, nah, like, this is a well-used book. I was able to do when I was able to do that with, Dr. Nathaniel Norman, when I got to speak to him, which first of all was like life goals, but also like,
Mm,
this is the book that I use all through grad school, and my tabs are still there, and it's still on my desk because this is integral. I think that it's great to be able to do that, and I'm sure that it is reaffirming for people to see that, like, now your book actually is making a difference,
mm, agreed. Agreed.
which isn't as possible with the PDFs. So,
Understood. We'll talk about my favorite software at some point.
so you talked
Uh,
about what you're interested in, about the past and the present. So, what about the future? You mentioned you started going down that vein.
mm,
So, what are the questions that we should be asking moving forward? What should we be thinking about? I mean, even now in this moment, because there's so much happening right now. And like you said, we're not necessarily in a recovery mode so much as we are like, what is going on, and just documenting and speaking about that.
mm. I gave a keynote last year to a conference I think you would have enjoyed, Critical Black Media Studies. And I spent my time talking about this concept that Kara Keeling introduced me to in her book, uh, Queer Times, Black Futures. And it's called miserableism, right? And she took it from the Chicago surrealists who said that miserableism is this state of mind where you find pleasure in things that bring you misery. Right? And my argument for this keynote, because I always try to be as provocative as possible, is that there's far too much, at least for the article side. I'm not going to speak to the book side, but I review a fair amount of articles and read a lot more. That we are so focused on how bad we are being treated by the world, or how hard we're trying to resist the world, or how oppressed we are, that we are somehow seems like we're taking delight in this misery and we're not looking for ways to talk about what we find ways to not circumvent, but work through. Right. And so I would repeat from that lecture that we need to get off that. We need to stop focusing on how miserable the world is because it's absolutely gotten worse since February of last year. Right? They are shutting down DDI, CDC, OSHA, anything with initials. They're shutting it down right now. Right? They're really targeting, in many ways, the Black middle class and higher education, right? I was really happy to see last Friday, judge finally said that letter that they sent out where they have to take DEI out of K through 12 school districts. You must ignore that. That's unconstitutional. Thank God. But the universities are still going full speed ahead with saying we're going to shut down our DEI because we don't want to lose our overhead, right? And so, what do you talk about when you know that you no longer can openly have African American studies programs? You no longer can have offices of minority educational development. Hell, they're probably going to come after Trio and SSS and McNair next, right?
Mhm.
And so this is where this is why I listened to the Moten podcast that you guys did, because he said we had Black studies before Black studies was part of the institution,
Mhm.
right? And so my hope for the future of Black studies is that we continue to do so. And sometimes we'll have to do it in coded language, right? One of my colleagues, I want to say it was Nikki Washington at UNC. No, Karen Atia. She was doing a course on journalism and diversity, and Harvard delisted the course. And what she did was she took the course to social media and basically said, we're going to run this on Zoom, right? Kind of like Hillman talk, but not as dramatic. And so there are multiple ways at this moment that we can disseminate information to people, right, without having to worry about whether or not we're in a Black Studies program. Because one of the things that's been interesting to me going through the list of people that y'all have, everybody y'all have is not in a Black Studies program.
No.
Many of us are one of in a program that does Black Studies work. I would be, fortunately, I have Susanna Morris and Joycelyn Wilson in my program, right? And so they do Black Studies. So it's not just me for once. Right. But many of us are one of. And so if we're still one of in a program that doesn't really care about us, that means we can still continue doing Black studies, not quite insurgent, right? But for the foreseeable future, at least the next 1,300 days until we hopefully have another election, we can continue still doing what we're doing. I still, however, want us to start dedicating more energy, people who are doing Black studies, towards promoting modes of Black life that are life giving, as opposed to modes of Black life that are simply about fighting for a political outcome. And I say that because um, the thing I've been saying for the last few years since the book came out is who will you be when the war is over? Who will you be when racism is over? You've configured yourself as a soldier so you can fight. What does a soldier do when the war is done? Right. And so if you don't start thinking about that now, you're gonna have PTSD, be on the heroin, whatever your drug of choice is, because you still have not dealt with the person. You weren't thinking about who you were going to be when it's done. You were too focused on the fight. And we can hold multiple ideas in our head at once. We can go get Popeye's chicken and stand in line and vote, right? Right. And so I think it's important that we keep both of those things in mind at the same time and work towards the what we can do to continue to build Black life, support Black life, do Black collectivity and accountability as we try to work through whatever BS this administration is levying upon us and our peoples. So, and I think Black Studies has a role in that. Even though I know uh, from how I've gotten dragged on Twitter that a lot of the people that I profess to love think that academics are class traders. Uh, my favorite Twitter interaction is somebody's like, what the hell is there to write about Black Twitter anyway? I was like, I wrote a book. It's free if you want to read it. It's like, I don't need no damn book about Black Twitter. I'm on Black Twitter. You got it. You got it, fam. But one of my favorite authors, I think this was Lewis Gordon, said, just because you're Black doesn't mean you know what it means to be Black.
Mhm.
And so we need Black intellectuals, Black philosophers, Black historians, Black educators. We need all those people to not necessarily document, but to elaborate on some of the things that make us who we are and how we tick. Right. And so I think that's the future of Black studies for at least this next 3.5 years. I'm sorry, 3 3/4 years. That's crucial for this next 3 3/4 years. But even beyond that, as AI continues to encroach, uh, and try to take up what Blackness is in order to expand its goal of having all the content, we got to figure out ways to work around and beyond that.
We do, but I truly believe that we will, because
Your lips to God's ears.
yeah, I don't I think that there is nothing you can't there is something about, like, authentic, everyday Black life that I don't that can't be replicated because it doesn't come off like, it might look the same, it might sound the same, it's not gonna feel the same. Like, that feeling of Blackness is not something that can be replicated.
And
And
I try to write about that. I call it embodied cognition, but it's been written about much better. But Joe Morgan has this line that I love, and I will not repeat it in its entirety. But honest bodies that like to, right? If you don't have that, you're not going to get a real sense of what blackness is,
Mhm,
right? This is why I'm writing. I'm using the blues right now, right? Because the blues is about sensuality and sexuality and carnality, but it's also about spirituality and mysticism, right? And
mhm.
religion. And so if you combine the sacred and the sensual, you get something that's us, right? And so yeah, I think it's really important that we continue to think through blackness in those dimensions without resorting to one or another.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Oof. The old book, Distributed Blackness, is available for free in PDF and EPUB on New York University Press's website. It's opensquare.nyu.edu. As always, my DMs are open for people if they're teaching the book or have questions about the method, CTDA, please DM me and I'll come talk to your class and try to explain what the hell I was talking about. Because unfortunately, my writing is recursive. I admit to that, right? So I'm always happy to come do Q&As or answer questions. But most of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for this conversation. This has been fantastic. I hope I brought the energy that y'all needed. I really am happy to be hailed by Black Studies. It's been a long time coming for me, but I'm really happy to be here, and I hope that I continue to have a lot to contribute to this field, to this endeavor.
Thank you so, so much again. This has been a really fun and informative conversation, so I greatly appreciate it.